The scorching Texas sun beat down on former Marine Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez as he pulled into the sprawling Veterans Affairs Medical Center in San Antonio. His scarred hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career military man, despite having retired from active duty 3 years ago. His broad shoulders and muscular frame spoke of countless hours of training, while the slight limp in his left leg told a different story, one of sacrifice and survival. Through the windshield, Marcus watched other veterans making their way into the medical center, some with families, others alone. Each step toward those automatic glass doors felt like a challenge, a reminder of why he was here. The nightmares had been getting worse lately, vivid flashbacks of his last deployment to Afghanistan, particularly of that fateful day in Kandahar when everything changed. The day he lost Shadow. Shadow had been more than just a military working dog. The Belgian Malinois had been his partner, his guardian, and his closest companion through 3 deployments. Together, they had conducted over 200 successful missions, detecting IEDs and keeping their units safe in the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. But their last mission had ended differently. An ambush that left Marcus severely wounded and separated from Shadow in the chaos that followed. Marcus pulled down the sun visor and looked at himself in the small mirror, the scar running along. His jawline had faded to a thin white line, but the memories remained as fresh as ever. His dark eyes, once bright with purpose, now carried a weight that his weekly therapy sessions at the VA hadn't managed to lift. He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, cut short out of habit rather than necessity, and took a deep breath. Dr. Sarah Chen, his therapist, had suggested something different for today's session. She had mentioned a new program involving retired military working dogs, therapy that might help veterans like him process their trauma. Marcus hadn't told her about Shadow yet, couldn't bring himself to share that particular wound. How could he explain that losing Shadow felt like losing a part of himself? The dashboard clock showed 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes until his appointment. Marcus reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a worn photograph, him and Shadow in Afghanistan, both covered in dust, but standing proud. Shadow's alert ears and intelligent eyes seemed to pierce through time itself. The last intel Marcus had received indicated that Shadow had survived that day, had been evacuated separately, but despite years of searching, he'd never managed to locate his former partner. A knock on his car window startled Marcus from his thoughts. It was Mike Thompson, another veteran he'd met in group therapy. Mike's prosthetic leg gleamed in the sunlight as he steadied himself against the car. "Sitting this one out, Rodriguez?" Mike's voice carried its usual mix of humor and understanding. Marcus managed a slight smile and opened the door. "Just gathering my thoughts, Thompson. You know how it is." "Yeah, I do." Mike fell into step beside him as they walked toward the entrance. "Heard about the new program they're starting. Something about working with retired service dogs. Might do you some good, getting back in the saddle." Marcus's chest tightened at the mention of service dogs, but he kept his expression neutral. "Maybe. We'll see what Dr. Chen has to say." The VA center's interior was a stark contrast to the heat outside, cool, sterile, and humming with activity. The familiar scent of antiseptic and coffee from the small cafeteria mixed in the air. Marcus noticed several new faces among the usual crowd, including what appeared to be dog handlers in civilian clothing, leading well-trained dogs through the corridors. As they approached the mental health wing, Mike gave Marcus a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Whatever Dr. Chen's got planned, give it a shot. Can't be worse than Thompson's attempts at stand-up comedy in group, right?" The joke drew a genuine chuckle from Marcus. "Nothing could be worse than that, Mike. Nothing." Watching his friend head off to his own appointment, Marcus felt the weight of the photograph in his pocket. He hadn't mentioned Shadow to anyone here, hadn't been able to face that particular aspect of his past. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was time to finally talk about the partner he'd lost, the friend he'd never stopped searching for, and the guilt that had been eating away at him for the past 3 years. The mental health wing's waiting room was quieter than usual. Marcus signed in at the desk, noting that his hands weren't shaking as badly as they usually did. Perhaps it was the photograph in his pocket, a tangible reminder of a time when he'd felt whole, capable, strong. Or maybe it was the thought that somewhere out there, Shadow might still be alive, might still remember him, might still be waiting for a reunion that seemed more impossible with each passing day. Marcus settled into one of the worn leather chairs. In the waiting room, his fingers absently tracing the outline of the photograph in his pocket. The familiar environment of the VA center, with its pale blue walls and motivational posters, had become a second home over the past 3 years. Yet today, the atmosphere felt charged with something different, an energy he couldn't quite embrace. Through the large windows overlooking the parking lot, he watched as a white van pulled up, its side emblazoned with the logo of Second Chance K9, Military Working Dog Rehabilitation Program. 2 handlers emerged, dressed in casual khakis and polo shirts, and began unloading equipment from the back. Marcus couldn't see any dogs yet, but the sight of the leashes and training gear sent a fresh wave of memories crashing over him. He remembered the countless hours spent training with Shadow, the way they had learned to read each other's subtlest signals. Shadow had been exceptional, even among military working dogs, intelligent, focused, and possessing an almost supernatural ability to detect threats. The dog's dark eyes had always held a depth of understanding that went beyond mere training. They had developed a bond that transcended the typical handler-canine relationship. The waiting room television droned quietly in the background, showing a local news segment about veteran support programs. Marcus noticed a young woman sitting across from him, probably in her early 30s, her right arm ending just below the elbow. She was reading a dog training manual with intense concentration, occasionally making notes in the margins. The sight reminded him of his own early days with Shadow, studying every piece of literature he could find on military working dogs. Staff, Sergeant Rodriguez? The receptionist's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Dr. Chen will see you now. Marcus stood, his left leg protesting slightly, a souvenir from the ambush that had separated him from Shadow. As he walked down the corridor to Dr. Chen's office, he passed several therapy rooms where veterans were working with service dogs. The sounds of gentle commands and occasional barks echoed through the hallway, each one striking a chord deep within him. Dr. Chen's office was exactly as he remembered it, walls lined with credentials and artwork, a comfortable couch facing her desk, and large windows that let in natural light. But today there was something new, a dog bed in the corner and a water bowl by the door. "Marcus, please come in," Dr. Chen greeted him with her usual warm smile. She was a petite woman in her 40s, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and an air of quiet competence that had helped earn Marcus's trust. "Over the months, I've made some changes to the office, as you can see." Marcus lowered himself onto the couch, his eyes drawn to the dog bed. "The new program you mentioned?" "Yes." Dr. Chen sat in her chair, clipboard ready but not yet the focus of her attention. "We're integrating animal-assisted therapy into our PTSD treatment programs. Many veterans find it easier to process trauma when working with dogs." She paused, studying his reaction. "You've never mentioned any experience with military working dogs in our sessions." The photograph felt heavy in his pocket. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "No, I haven't. Would you like to talk about that today?" The question hung in the air between them. Through the window, Marcus could see the Second Chance K9 handlers now leading several dogs across the parking lot. Each animal moved with the distinctive precision of military training, bringing back memories of Shadow's fluid grace. "His name was Shadow," Marcus finally said, his voice rougher than usual. He pulled out the photograph and held it for a moment before passing it to Dr. Chen. "Belgian Malinois. We worked together for 3 years, 3 deployments. He was—" Marcus paused, searching for words that could adequately describe what Shadow had meant to him. "He was the best of us." Dr. Chen examined the photograph carefully. "What happened to him?" Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the office walls. "Our last mission in Kandahar. We were conducting a routine sweep for IEDs when our unit was ambushed. Shadow had just alerted to something, not an explosive, something different. Before I could process his signal, all hell broke loose. He fell silent, remembering the chaos of that day. The crack of gunfire, the explosion that had thrown him against a wall, the searing pain in his leg. But most of all, he remembered Shadow's bark, urgent and protective, before everything went black. "I woke up in Germany 2 weeks later," Marcus continued. "They told me Shadow had survived, had been evacuated separately, but by the time I was stable enough to start looking for him," he shook his head, "the trail was cold, different units, different bases, paperwork that never seemed to lead anywhere, 3 years of dead ends." Dr. Chen set the photograph carefully on her desk. "And you've been carrying this alone all this time?" Didn't seem right to talk about it, not when other guys lost so much more. Marcus gestured vaguely toward the waiting room, thinking of the young woman with the missing arm, of Mike with his prosthetic leg. "Loss isn't a competition, Marcus," Dr. Chen said gently, "and sometimes the bonds we form with our military working dogs can be as deep as any human relationship, sometimes deeper because of the trust involved in combat situations." Marcus reached for the photograph on Dr. Chen's desk, studying Shadow's alert expression one more time before returning it to his pocket. "I've been working through those memories every day for the past 3 years. At least now it feels like I'm doing something about it." As their session drew to a close, Dr. Chen stood and walked to her office door. "The Second Chance K9 team will be here all week, working with various veterans. Would you be interested in observing some of their sessions? It might help you understand their methods, and it could be beneficial for your own therapy." Marcus nodded, rising from his chair. Through the window, he could see the white van being loaded up for departure. The handlers were securing the dogs in their transport kennels, each movement precise and practiced. It reminded him of countless missions with Shadow, the routine they had perfected together, the trust they had built. "Thank you, Dr. Chen," he said, turning back to face her. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I might actually find him." The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Marcus immersed himself in the Second Chance K9 program. He spent hours at the VA center, observing training sessions and speaking with other veterans who had been through similar experiences. Each story of successful reunion kindled a small flame of hope within him, though he tried to temper his expectations. On Thursday afternoon, he sat in on a session with Mike Thompson, who was working with a young German shepherd named Rex. The dog's alert posture and intelligent eyes reminded Marcus so much of Shadow that he had to look away several times during the session. "You know, Rodriguez," Mike said as they watched Rex performing obedience exercises with his trainer, "I never understood why you were so closed off in group. Seeing you these past few days, watching how you are around these dogs, it's like seeing a different person." Marcus nodded, his eyes following Rex's movements. The dog was learning to respond to civilian commands rather than military ones, part of its rehabilitation process. "Working with Shadow was the one time in my life when everything made perfect sense. We had a purpose, a mission. We knew exactly what we needed to do and how to do it." Lisa Martinez, one of the Second Chance K9 handlers, approached them with Rex at heel. She was a former Army K9 handler herself, and her understanding of both the dogs and their handlers was evident in every interaction. "Would you like to work with him for a few minutes, Marcus? Sometimes it helps to get hands-on experience, even with a different dog." Marcus hesitated, his heart racing. He hadn't handled a military-trained dog since Shadow. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. "I don't want to interfere with his training." "You won't," Lisa assured him. "Rex is pretty far along in his rehabilitation. He's good at adapting to different handlers." She held out the leash, her expression encouraging but not pushing. Taking a deep breath, Marcus accepted the leash. Rex immediately turned his attention to him, ears forward, waiting for direction. The familiar weight of the leash in his hand brought back a flood of memories. Early morning training sessions with Shadow, long patrols through dusty streets, quiet moments of connection between missions. "Just start with some basic commands," Lisa suggested. "Let him get used to your voice." Marcus straightened his posture instinctively. "Rex, heel." His voice cracked slightly on the command, but the dog responded immediately, moving to his left side in perfect position. The simple action sent a jolt of emotion through Marcus's chest. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus worked with Rex, going through basic obedience commands and movement exercises. With each successful interaction, he felt something inside him beginning to unlock. It wasn't the same as working with Shadow, could never be the same, but it was awakening muscle memories he'd thought long buried. "You've still got it," Mike commented from his chair, watching Marcus and Rex move in sync across the training area. "It's like riding a bike, isn't it?" Before Marcus could respond, Lisa's phone buzzed. She checked it quickly, her eyes widening slightly. "Marcus, could you come with me for a moment? Keep Rex with you." She led them toward Dr. Chen's office, her pace brisk but controlled. Dr. Chen was waiting at her door, her expression carefully neutral. "Marcus, please come in. Lisa, would you mind waiting out here with Rex?" Inside the office, Dr. Chen gestured for Marcus to sit. "We've had some news from the Second Chance K9 team." She paused, shuffling some papers on her desk. "They've located a Belgian Malinois, matching Shadow's description and identification." "Number?" Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. He gripped the arms of his chair, forcing himself to stay focused. "Where?" "He's been working with a private security firm in Colorado for the past 2 years. Before that, he was with a police K9 unit in Nevada." Dr. Chen looked at him carefully. "The team has made contact with the security firm, and they're willing to release him to the program. But Marcus," she leaned forward, her expression serious, "he's been through a lot. 3 different handlers since you, multiple roles. He's not the same dog you knew in Afghanistan." Marcus nodded, trying to process the information. Shadow was alive. After 3 years of searching, of hoping, of dreading, he was alive and found. "When can I see him?" "The team can have him here by next Tuesday. But we need to prepare you for the possibility that he may not recognize you immediately. Dogs can experience their own form of PTSD, and memory can be complicated, especially after multiple handlers." Outside the office, Rex whined softly, picking up on the emotional tension in the air. Marcus could hear Lisa quietly reassuring him. "I understand," Marcus said, though his heart was racing with a mixture of hope and fear. "What do I need to do?" Dr. Chen pulled out a thick folder. "First, we need to go through Shadow's history since your separation. Understanding what he's been through will help you understand any changes in his behavior. Then we'll work on strategies. For the reunion, what to expect, how to approach him, how to give him the time and space he might need." Marcus reached for the folder with trembling hands. 3 years of Shadow's life were documented in these pages. 3 years of experiences he hadn't shared, of bonds formed with other handlers, of adjustments and transitions. Part of him wanted to devour every detail immediately, while another part feared what he might learn, one day at a time, Dr. Chen reminded him gently. Just like everything else we've worked on, this is a marathon, not a sprint. The weekend crawled by with excruciating slowness. Marcus spent hours poring over Shadow's file, tracing his partner's journey through various units and assignments. After the ambush, Shadow had been evacuated to a military hospital in Germany, just like Marcus, but their paths had diverged there. While Marcus fought through months of rehabilitation, Shadow had been deemed fit for duty and reassigned to a different unit. The photographs in the file showed Shadow's progression through the years. First with a young Marine handler in Afghanistan, then with the Nevada Police Department, and finally with the security firm in Colorado. In each image, Shadow maintained his military bearing, but Marcus could see subtle changes in his former partner. The playful glint that had once characterized Shadow's eyes seemed dimmer, replaced by a more hardened focus. Sunday evening found Marcus in his garage, methodically cleaning and organizing Shadow's old gear. He'd kept everything. The worn leather collar with Shadow's military tags, the special brush he'd used to groom him, even the tennis ball that had been Shadow's soul. Indulgence between missions. Each item held memories that now felt both precious and painful. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Shadow's transport is on schedule. ETA Tuesday, 0900. Get some rest, Marcus. Rest, however, proved elusive. Marcus spent Monday in a state of heightened anticipation, alternating between reviewing the reunion protocols Dr. Chen had given him and walking aimlessly around his house. He'd taken the week off from his job at the local Veterans Outreach Center, knowing he wouldn't be able to focus on anything else. By Monday evening, he found himself back at the VA center, sitting in on a group session with other handlers who had gone through similar reunions. Their stories were both encouraging and sobering. "My ranger didn't recognize me for the first 3 days," a former Army sergeant shared, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd sit with him for hours, just talking, letting him get used to my presence. Then on the 4th day, I was drinking coffee, and I dropped my cup. The sound startled him, and he just looked at me, really looked at me. And suddenly he remembered, started whining and pressing against me like he used to do during thunderstorms in Baghdad." Another veteran, a woman who had served with the Air Force, nodded in agreement. "It's like they have to work through layers of training and experience. Each handler leaves an imprint, and they need time to sort through those memories. But when it clicks, when they finally remember, there's nothing else like it." Marcus absorbed their words, trying to prepare himself for any outcome. Dr. Chen had emphasized the importance of managing expectations, but his heart raced every time he thought about seeing Shadow again. Late that night, unable to sleep, Marcus sat on his back porch with Shadow's old collar in his hands. The metal tags caught the moonlight, reflecting the information etched into them. Shadow's military ID number, his date of birth, his deployment history. Marcus had memorized every detail years ago, but now he traced the letters with his fingers, grounding himself in their familiar patterns. His phone lit up with another message from Lisa. "Just got word from the transport team. Shadow's doing well. Calm during travel breaks, eating normally. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." Marcus looked up at the stars, remembering nights in Afghanistan when he and Shadow would take the midnight watch together. Shadow had always seemed more alert under the stars, his senses heightened in the quiet darkness. They developed a rhythm during those watches, Marcus scanning the horizon while Shadow monitored their immediate surroundings, each trusting the other completely. "Please remember me," Marcus whispered to the night air, clutching the collar. "Please, buddy, remember us." The next morning arrived with a clarity that seemed almost surreal. Marcus showered and dressed with mechanical precision, choosing civilian clothes as advised by the Second Chance K9 team. Nothing that might remind Shadow of combat situations or trigger stress responses. He arrived at the VA center 45 minutes early, parking in his usual spot but remaining in his car. The white Second Chance K9 van was already there, and he could see Lisa and another handler setting up one of the outdoor training areas. They were creating a controlled environment for the reunion, neutral territory where both Shadow and Marcus could feel secure. Dr. Chen arrived shortly after, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She knocked gently on Marcus's car window and handed him one of the cups when he stepped out. "How are you feeling?" Marcus accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Like I'm about to defuse an IED blindfolded." "Remember what we discussed," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "No expectations, no pressure. This is just the first step in what might be a longer journey. Whatever happens today, we're here to support both of you." They walked together toward the training area, where Lisa was now checking the perimeter. The space had been carefully prepared, a large fenced area with scattered shade trees and benches, but minimal distractions. A few other handlers and veterans stood at a discreet distance, ready to assist if needed. Marcus checked his watch. 8:47 a.m. Somewhere on the nearby highway, a transport vehicle was carrying his former partner closer with each passing minute. After 3 years of searching, of hoping, of dreaming about this moment, it was finally happening. Shadow was coming home. At precisely 9 a.m., a black SUV with Colorado plates pulled into the VA center parking lot. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. As he watched it park next to the Second Chance K9 van, Lisa squeezed his shoulder gently before walking over to meet the transport team. Through the tinted windows, Marcus could make out the outline of a travel kennel in the back seat. "Remember to breathe," Dr. Chen murmured beside him. "We're going to take this slow." 2 handlers emerged from the SUV, a tall man with graying hair and a younger woman wearing a Second Chance K9 uniform. They spoke briefly with Lisa, exchanging paperwork and information. Marcus strained to hear their conversation, but the morning breeze carried their voices away. He could see them gesturing toward the prepared area, nodding in agreement about something. Then the back door opened, and Marcus got his first real glimpse of Shadow in 3 years. The Belgian Malinois emerged with characteristic military precision, responding to commands from the female handler. His coat was perhaps a shade darker than Marcus remembered, and there was more grey around his muzzle, but his bearing was unmistakable. Shadow surveyed his new surroundings with professional interest, his ears forward and alert, his movements controlled and purposeful. Marcus's knees nearly buckled. Dr. Chen steadied him with a gentle hand on his elbow. "Take your time," she whispered. "Let them bring him to the training area first." The handlers led Shadow through a series of basic commands, helping him acclimate to the new environment. Marcus watched as his former partner executed each movement, with fluid grace, noting how Shadow's training had evolved. Some of his responses were different now, subtle changes that spoke of years spent with other handlers, learning new protocols and expectations. After about 15 minutes, Lisa approached Marcus. "We're ready to start the introduction if you are. Remember, no sudden movements, no calling out to him. Let him set the pace." Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice. He followed Lisa to the entrance of the training area, his feet feeling like lead with each step. Shadow was about 30 yards away, still working with the female handler. From this distance, Marcus could see the subtle signs of age in his former partner. A slight stiffness in his back legs, a more measured pace to his movements. "Okay, Marcus," Lisa said softly. "Just walk to the bench in the center and sit down. Act natural, like you're just here to enjoy the morning." Drawing on years of military training, Marcus forced himself to move casually, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to run to Shadow. He settled onto the bench, his hands clasped tightly in his lap to keep them from shaking. The morning sun was warm on his face, but he felt chilled to his core. The female handler began working Shadow in, gradually expanding circles, slowly bringing him closer to where Marcus sat. Shadow remained focused on his handler, executing each command with precision, though his ears occasionally flicked in Marcus's direction. There was no sign of recognition in his bearing. Marcus might as well have been any other stranger in the park. Good boy, the handler praised as Shadow completed another circuit. They were perhaps 15 feet from Marcus now, close enough that he could hear Shadow's breathing, could see the rise and fall of his powerful chest. A detail caught Marcus's eye, a small scar above Shadow's right eye that hadn't been there before, a new story written on his old friend's face. Suddenly, Shadow's head turned sharply toward Marcus. His nostrils flared, testing the air. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Marcus felt the weight of years collapse into a single heartbeat. But Shadow's gaze moved on, continuing his scan of the environment with professional detachment. Marcus bit his lip hard, fighting back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He'd known this might happen, had been prepared for it, by Dr. Chen, by the other handlers, by every piece of documentation he'd read. But the reality of Shadow looking through him, not recognizing the bond they'd shared, cut deeper than any physical wound he'd received in combat. The handler brought Shadow closer still, now working barely 10 feet from the bench. Shadow's movements remained precise, but Marcus noticed a subtle tension in his former partner's body. Something was registering, perhaps not recognition yet, but awareness that this particular human was different from the others in the area. "He's picking up on your scent," Lisa murmured from where she stood a few yards away. "Give him time to process it." Marcus remained still, watching as Shadow completed another circuit. This time, when the dog passed near him, his step faltered slightly. Shadow's head turned again, his nose working more actively. The handler, noting the change, allowed him a moment to investigate while maintaining gentle control of the leash. Shadow took a half step toward Marcus, then stopped, his body language showing the first signs of uncertainty. His ears moved back and forth, and his tail, which had been held in a neutral position, dropped slightly. He looked at Marcus again, longer this time, something flickering in the depths of his dark eyes. But still, there was no clear sign of recognition. After a moment, Shadow returned his attention to his handler, responding to her quiet command to continue their circuit. Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his hands unclenching slowly from their tight grip on each other. Dr. Chen appeared beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "This is normal, Marcus. Remember what we discussed. The first session is just about establishing presence, letting him know you're here. We'll take a break soon, let him rest and process, then try again this afternoon." The afternoon session proved equally challenging. Shadow remained professionally detached, though his moments of hesitation near Marcus grew more frequent. By evening, Marcus felt emotionally drained. The hope he'd carried for 3 years, warring with the reality of his partner's apparent amnesia. He spent that night in a state of restless anxiety, alternating between reviewing old mission photos and pacing his house. Wednesday morning arrived with a heavy fog that shrouded the VA center in a ghostly haze. Marcus arrived early again, watching from his car, as the handlers prepared for another day of carefully orchestrated interactions. His phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Hang in there, brother. Rome wasn't built in a day." The morning session followed a similar pattern to the previous day, but with subtle differences. Shadow seemed more attuned to Marcus's presence, his professional demeanor occasionally slipping to reveal moments of curiosity. During one circuit, he actually paused near the bench, his nose working overtime as he processed Marcus's scent. The handler allowed this investigation, maintaining a loose leash, while Shadow's internal conflict played out in his body language. "His behavior is changing," Lisa noted during their midday break. "He's starting to question his training, trying to reconcile the familiar scents and sounds with his current reality. It's a good sign, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." Marcus nodded, watching as Shadow rested in a shaded area with his temporary handler. Even at rest, his former partner maintained his vigilant posture, a habit ingrained through years of service. "In Afghanistan," Marcus said quietly, "he used to sleep with his head on my boots during our downtime. Said it helped him track me if we got separated in the dark." The afternoon brought another change to their routine. Instead of just sitting passively, Lisa suggested that Marcus read aloud while Shadow worked nearby. "Sometimes it's not just about scent and sight," she explained. "Voice recognition can be a powerful trigger for memories." So Marcus sat on his bench with a worn copy of Once an Eagle, a book he'd often read during their quiet moments between missions. His voice was shaky at first, but as he fell into the rhythm of the familiar words, he felt himself relaxing. Shadow's circuits brought him closer and closer, his ears constantly swiveling to track Marcus's voice. During one pass, something remarkable happened. As Marcus read a particularly intense passage about combat, his voice took on the commanding tone he'd used during missions. Shadow's reaction was immediate. His head snapped around, ears forward, body tensing in a pose Marcus had seen countless times in the field. For a split second, there was a flash of something in Shadow's eyes: recognition, confusion, uncertainty. The moment passed quickly, Shadow returning to his professional demeanor, but it left Marcus breathless. Dr. Chen, who had been observing nearby, made a note in her folder. "That's the first true connection we've seen," she said. "His muscle memory responded to your command voice before his conscious mind could override it." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of similar exercises, each designed to trigger different aspects of their shared past. By evening, Shadow was showing clear signs of mental fatigue, his usual sharp responses becoming slightly delayed. The handlers decided to end the session early, giving him time to rest and process the day's experiences. As Marcus watched them lead Shadow back to his temporary kennel, Lisa approached with an unusual suggestion. "We'd like to try something different tomorrow," she said. "Something that might help bridge the gap between his past and present." She pulled out a familiar item from her bag, Shadow's old tactical vest, the one he'd worn during their missions together. Marcus recognized it instantly, though it had been cleaned and restored. "Where did you get that?" "It was in his service record. We requested it from the military archives," Lisa explained. "Sometimes familiar equipment can help trigger memories, especially for working dogs. We'll have to be careful. We don't want to trigger any trauma, but the familiar scents and textures might help him make the connection." Marcus reached out to touch the vest, his fingers finding the small repair he'd made after a particularly rough mission. The stitching was still there, slightly crooked but strong. "You think it'll help?" "It's worth trying," Lisa said. "We're seeing progress, even if it's not as fast as we'd hope. Tomorrow we'll have him wear this during our sessions. The combination of the vest, your presence, and your voice might be enough to break through whatever walls he's built up." That night, Marcus dreamed of Afghanistan, not of the ambush or the violence, but of the quiet moments. Shadow lying beside him in their tent, both of them covered in dust but content. The way Shadow would press against his leg during sandstorms, offering comfort as much as seeking it. The silent conversations they'd had during long nights on watch, understanding each other without need for words. He woke before dawn, his mind clearer than it had been in days. Something Lisa had said kept repeating in his thoughts: walls he's built up. Marcus understood those walls all too well. He'd built his own after losing Shadow, keeping people at arm's length, avoiding attachments. Maybe that's what Shadow was doing now, protecting himself from the pain of remembering, of reconnecting. As he drove to the VA center for their third day of sessions, Marcus made a decision. He wouldn't push for recognition today. Instead, he would simply be present, offering Shadow the same unconditional support his partner had always given him. If Shadow needed time to work through his walls, Marcus would give him that time. After all, Shadow had never given up on him, even during his darkest moments in combat. Lisa approached Shadow with the tactical vest early Thursday morning, the fog still clinging to the ground around them. The dog's reaction to seeing his old equipment was subtle but immediate. His ears perked forward and his nose twitched with interest. The handler carefully secured the vest, adjusting the familiar straps with practiced ease, while Shadow stood perfectly still, his training evident in every line of his body. Marcus watched from his usual bench, noting how Shadow's posture changed. Once the vest was in place, there was a slight shift in his bearing, an almost imperceptible straightening of his spine. The vest seemed to awaken something in him, not quite memory, but perhaps muscle memory, the physical recall of countless missions and training sessions. "Take note of his body language," Dr. Chen murmured beside Marcus. "He's responding to the familiar weight and feel of the vest. His breathing pattern has changed, become more focused. These are all positive signs." The morning session began with standard obedience exercises, but Shadow's responses were different now. His movements had taken on a sharper edge, more military precision than civilian control. When the handler gave commands, Shadow executed them with an intensity that hadn't been present before, as if the vest had reawakened some deeply buried part of his training. During one of their circuits, Shadow suddenly stopped, his nose working overtime. He turned his head toward Marcus, nostrils flaring as he processed the combination of scents, Marcus's presence, the old vest, the lingering morning dew. For a long moment, he stood completely still, every muscle tense with concentration. The handler allowed this investigation, maintaining a loose leash while Shadow worked through whatever was happening in his mind. His ears moved back and forth, catching every sound, and his tail, usually held in a neutral position, began to show signs of uncertainty, not quite wagging, but no longer still. "He's processing," Lisa explained quietly. "The vest carries years of memories, your scent, the sense of combat, training, missions. Combined with your presence, it's creating a cognitive challenge for him. He's trying to reconcile his current training with these old sensory inputs." Marcus remained still, his heart pounding as he watched his former partner struggle with this internal conflict. Shadow took a hesitant step toward the bench, then another, his behavior showing none of the professional detachment of previous sessions. There was something different in his eyes now, a question, a puzzle he was trying to solve. Suddenly, a car backfired in the distant parking lot. Shadow's reaction was instantaneous and revealing. Instead of moving into a defensive position with his current handler, he automatically shifted toward Marcus, assuming the protective stance they had practiced countless times in combat situations. For a split second, muscle memory had overridden his current training. The moment passed quickly, Shadow seeming almost confused by his own reaction. He looked between Marcus and his handler, his ears betraying his uncertainty. The handler, gently, guided him back to their routine, but something had changed. Shadow's attention kept returning to Marcus, his glances longer, more questioning. During their midday break, Lisa suggested another change to their approach. "I think we should try some basic tactical commands, nothing that would trigger combat responses, but the kind of everyday directions you would have used during training. His muscle memory is clearly active today. Let's see if we can build on that." Marcus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. They moved to a quieter area of the training ground, and Lisa handed him a training lead. "Remember, calm, confident. Commands, just like you used to do. We'll start with simple movements. Taking a deep breath, Marcus assumed the position that had once been as natural as breathing. "Shadow, heel," he commanded, his voice carrying the same quiet authority he'd used thousands of times before. Shadow's response was immediate but complex. He moved to the heel position automatically, then stopped, confusion evident in his posture. He looked up at Marcus, then at his handler, caught between training and memory. "Good," Lisa encouraged. "Let's continue. Nice and easy." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus led Shadow through basic movement patterns, each command carrying the weight of their shared history. Shadow's responses became more fluid, less hesitant, though he still showed no clear signs of recognition. But there were moments, brief flashes, when his eyes would meet Marcus's with an intensity that hadn't been there before. As they worked, Marcus noticed small changes in Shadow's behavior. The way he matched his pace to Marcus's slight limp, something he had always done during their patrols. The subtle shift in his position when they turned corners, maintaining optimal coverage just as they had done in combat. These weren't conscious responses. They were deeper, ingrained habits that spoke of years of partnership. "Look at how he's compensating for your gait," Dr. Chen observed. "That's not something he was taught recently. That's an old pattern, emerging, something he learned specifically with you." The session ended with Shadow showing clear signs of mental fatigue, the cognitive effort of processing these old patterns taking its toll. As the handler prepared to lead him back to his rest area, Shadow paused. He turned to look at Marcus one more time, and in that moment, his eyes held something new, not quite recognition, but no longer the professional detachment of previous days. Something was changing, breaking through the walls of training and time. Friday dawned clear and cold, the autumn air crisp with promise. Marcus arrived at the VA center before sunrise, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee as he watched the handlers prepare for what would be their 4th day of sessions. Shadow's old tactical vest hung ready, its familiar outline stirring. Memories of countless pre-mission preparations. "We're going to try something different today," Lisa announced as she approached, her breath visible in the early morning air. "We've been working in controlled environments, but Shadow's memory seems to respond most strongly to tactical situations. Dr. Chen has approved a modified training exercise." She led Marcus to a new area they had set up behind the main training ground. Here, the team had constructed a simple obstacle course, nothing complex, but reminiscent of the training courses they had used in Afghanistan. Marcus's heart quickened as he recognized the layout. It was similar to one they had used countless times during their deployment. "The goal isn't to recreate combat conditions," Dr. Chen explained, joining them. "We want to tap into his training, memories without triggering any trauma. These are basic obstacles that you would have encountered during routine exercises." Shadow arrived with his handler, already wearing his tactical vest. His reaction to the obstacle course was immediate. His ears pricked forward, and his body language shifted from casual attention to focused readiness. This was familiar territory for him, something that transcended his various handlers and assignments. "Start with a basic walkthrough," Lisa suggested, handing Marcus the lead. "Let him reacquaint himself with you in this context." Marcus took a deep breath and began walking the course perimeter with Shadow. The dog moved with professional precision, but there was something different about his attitude now. His attention was split between the course and Marcus, as if he was trying to reconcile something in his mind. As they approached the first obstacle, a simple low wall, Marcus automatically fell into his old command pattern. "Shadow, over," he said quietly, using the exact tone and inflection he had used hundreds of times before. Shadow's response was instantaneous. He cleared the wall with fluid grace, then turned to look at Marcus with an intensity that hadn't been present before. They continued through the course, each obstacle bringing more of their old patterns to the surface. Shadows, Responses became increasingly synchronized with Marcus's movements, falling into rhythms they had perfected years ago. At one point, approaching a narrow passage, Shadow automatically shifted to Marcus's left side, a habit he had developed to compensate for Marcus's old injury during close-quarters navigation. "That's not part of his standard training," Lisa observed quietly. "That's something unique to your partnership." The morning progressed with increasingly complex patterns, each exercise designed to evoke more of their shared tactical experience. Shadow's behavior continued to evolve, showing more and more signs of remembering old patterns. During one exercise, Marcus used a hand signal they had developed specifically for their night operations, a subtle gesture that wasn't part of standard training. Shadow responded perfectly, just as he had years ago. "Look at his eyes, Doctor," Chen said during a brief break. "There's recognition there now, even if he's still processing it. He's responding to commands and signals that only you would know." The breakthrough came during a modified search exercise. Lisa had hidden several training aids throughout the course, and Marcus was working with Shadow to locate them. They fell into their old search pattern naturally, moving together with the coordinated precision that had once made them one of the most effective teams in their unit. As they approached the final search area, something caught Shadow's attention. He stopped suddenly, his entire body tensing. Marcus recognized the pose instantly. It was Shadow's alert position, the stance he took when he had detected something significant. But there was nothing there. Nothing except... Marcus realized, with a start, that they were standing in almost exactly the same position they had been in moments before the ambush in Kandahar. Shadow turned to look at him, and this time there was no mistaking the recognition in his eyes. The dog's ears flattened slightly, and a small whine escaped his throat, the same sound he had made just before pushing Marcus away from the explosion. "Shadow?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. The change was sudden and profound. Shadow's professional demeanor crumbled as years of training and conditioning gave way to raw memory. He pressed against Marcus's leg, not the casual contact of a working dog, but the desperate pressure of a partner recognizing his other half. His tail, which had maintained its professional stance for days, began to wag with increasing intensity. Marcus knelt down, his hands shaking as he reached for his former partner. Shadow pushed his head into Marcus's chest, whining softly, his entire body trembling with recognition and relief. The walls had finally broken, memory flooding back with overwhelming force. "Hey, buddy," Marcus managed, his voice thick with tears. "I've missed you. God, I've missed you so much." Shadow's response was to press closer, his cold nose finding the exact spot on Marcus's neck where he used to rest his head during their quiet moments between missions. It was a gesture so familiar, so uniquely theirs, that it left no doubt. Shadow hadn't just recognized him, he had remembered everything. The reunion that followed was both beautiful and heart-wrenching. Shadow refused to leave Marcus's side, maintaining constant physical contact, as if afraid his handler might disappear again. His transformation was complete. Gone was the professionally detached military working dog, replaced by the partner who had shared every moment of Marcus's deployment. Lisa approached carefully, wiping tears from her own eyes. "This is why we do this work," she said softly. "Every successful reunion reminds us that these bonds never truly break. They just need time and the right circumstances to resurface." Throughout the afternoon, Shadow continued to display more and more signs of his old personality emerging. He remembered all their unique commands, the special signals they had developed for different situations. During a brief rest period, he even nudged Marcus's water bottle with his nose, a habit he had developed during their deployment to remind Marcus to stay hydrated in the Afghan heat. Dr. Chen observed the interaction with professional interest, though her eyes betrayed her emotional investment in the outcome. The speed of his recall, once it started, is remarkable, she noted. It's as if breaking through that initial barrier released everything at once. His body language has completely changed. This is no longer a working dog with a handler, but a partner who has found his other half. As the day progressed, more veterans and staff gathered to witness the reunion. Mike Thompson arrived with his afternoon therapy group, all of them watching with understanding and emotion as Shadow demonstrated his renewed connection with Marcus. The dog would periodically scan their surroundings, not with his previous professional detachment, but with the focused intensity he had shown during their deployment, protecting his handler. The next phase is crucial, Lisa explained, as they began discussing transition plans. Shadow needs to relearn how to be a companion rather than just a working dog. He spent years maintaining strict professional boundaries with his handlers. Now he needs to remember how to relax, how to just be a dog again. Marcus nodded, watching as Shadow investigated their immediate surroundings while maintaining physical contact with his leg. He was always good at switching between modes, he recalled. On mission, he was all business, but in our downtime, he knew how to relax. He used to love playing fetch with water bottles, drove the other handlers crazy because he'd only do it with me. As if remembering, Shadow's ears perked up at the mention of water bottles. Marcus laughed, a genuine, joyous sound that made Shadow's tail wag even harder. Yeah, you remember that, don't you, buddy? All those games in the compound between missions? Dr. Chen made a final note in her file before closing it decisively. The Second Chance K9 team will help you with the transition process, but I think it's safe to say that Shadow is ready to go home. His recognition is complete, and separating you now would only cause unnecessary stress for both of you. The paperwork was processed with remarkable efficiency, perhaps helped by the obvious success of the reunion. Within hours, Marcus found himself standing in the VA Center parking lot, Shadow's leash in his hand, still barely able to believe this was real. The dog pressed against his leg, a solid warmth that anchored him to the moment. Lisa handed him a folder containing Shadow's medical records, training history, and care instructions. Remember, this is just the beginning, she said. You both need time to readjust. He's not the same dog he was 3 years ago, and you're not the same handler. Take it slow, build new routines together. Marcus nodded, his free hand resting on Shadow's head. We've got time now, he said quietly, all the time we need. The drive home was surreal. Shadow sat in the back seat, but his eyes never left Marcus, watching him in the rearview mirror with an intensity that spoke of years of separation. Every time Marcus looked back, Shadow's tail would thump against the seat, a gentle reminder that this wasn't a dream. As they pulled into Marcus's driveway, Shadow's ears pricked forward, taking in the new environment. Marcus opened the back door, and Shadow emerged with characteristic efficiency, immediately beginning a perimeter check of the yard. But this time, he kept looking back at Marcus, as if seeking confirmation that this was indeed their new post. "Welcome home, buddy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow completed his inspection and returned to Marcus's side, pressing against him with that familiar pressure. Together, they walked up to the front door, their steps naturally falling into sync despite the years apart. Inside, Shadow moved through the house with careful attention, investigating each room while staying within sight of Marcus. When he reached the living room, he found the corner where Marcus had kept his old bed and equipment. The dog turned to look at his handler, his expression questioning. "Yeah, I kept it all," Marcus admitted. "Never could bring myself to pack it away. Kept hoping we'd find each other again." Shadow walked to his old bed and sniffed it thoroughly before settling down, his eyes still fixed on Marcus. The position was so familiar. The same way he used to lie in their tent, alert but relaxed, always watching over his handler. The following days established a new rhythm for Marcus and Shadow as they relearned each other's patterns and adapted to civilian life together. Marcus took leave from his job at the Veterans Outreach Center, dedicating his time to helping Shadow transition from working dog to companion. The process was filled with both heartwarming moments and challenging adjustments. Every morning began with Shadow pressing his nose against Marcus's hand, a gentle reminder that he was there, that their reunion wasn't just a dream. They would walk the neighborhood together, Shadow maintaining his protective position but gradually learning to relax his vigilance. His reactions to everyday sounds, car doors slamming, children shouting, lawnmowers starting, became less pronounced as he adjusted to suburban life. A week after their reunion, Mike Thompson stopped by with his therapy dog, Rex. The interaction between the two dogs proved fascinating to watch. Shadow initially maintained his professional distance, but as Rex's playful nature emerged, something shifted. Gradually, tentatively, Shadow began to respond to Rex's play invitations, rediscovering aspects of his personality that had been suppressed by years of continuous service. "Look at that," Mike said, watching Shadow cautiously engage in a game of tug with Rex. "He's remembering how to be a dog again. It's like watching someone take off a uniform they've worn for too long." Marcus nodded, observing how Shadow would periodically check his position, making sure his handler was still there. "Still safe. The second chance K9 team said this might happen. He needs to learn that it's okay to relax, that we're not on mission anymore." The breakthrough in Shadow's transition came during an unexpected thunderstorm. As the first rumbles of thunder rolled across the sky, Shadow's military training kicked in. He assumed an alert position, ready for potential threats. But then something changed. Instead of maintaining his guard stance, he moved closer to Marcus, pressing against him just as he used to do during sandstorms in Afghanistan. "It's okay, buddy," Marcus whispered, running his hand along Shadow's back. "We're safe here. No more missions, no more combat, just us." Shadow looked up at him, and in that moment Marcus saw complete trust in his eyes. The dog gradually relaxed, settling beside Marcus on the couch as the storm raged outside. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Shadow was learning that he didn't always have to be on duty anymore. Their daily routine evolved to include regular visits to the VA Center, where Shadow's success story had inspired other veterans working with service dogs. Dr. Chen incorporated their visits into her therapy sessions, using their bond as an example of the healing power of these connections. "The transformation in both of you is remarkable," she noted during one session. "Shadow's helping other dogs transition too. They see him learning to relax, to play, to just be, and it shows them it's possible." Indeed, Shadow had become something of a celebrity at the center. Other veterans would seek them out, sharing their own stories of separation and hope. Shadow seemed to understand his new role, offering gentle encouragement to both humans and dogs struggling with their transitions. One afternoon, they received a surprise visit from Lisa and the Second Chance K9 team. They had been documenting successful reunions, hoping to secure more funding for their program. The sight of Shadow playing fetch in the backyard, something he had only ever done with Marcus, brought tears to Lisa's eyes. "This is why we never give up searching," she said, watching Shadow proudly return a tennis ball to Marcus. "Every dog deserves the chance to remember who they really are, to find their way back to the person who knows them best." The most profound changes were the quiet ones. Shadow no longer slept in his tactical position, alert for threats. Instead, he would curl up near Marcus's bed, relaxed but present. During their walks, his tail would wag more freely, his ears would prick with interest, rather than alertness at passing sounds. He was learning to distinguish between genuine threats and the normal sounds of civilian life. Marcus, too, found himself changing. The weight of loss that had haunted him for 3 years began to lift. Having Shadow back didn't erase the trauma they had both experienced, but it provided a foundation for healing. They understood each other's struggles, supported each other through the difficult moments. 1 month after their reunion, Marcus returned to work at the Veterans Outreach Center, this time with Shadow by his side. The dog's presence had a calming effect on the veterans they worked with, particularly those struggling with PTSD. Shadow seemed to instinctively know who needed his attention most, offering the same steady support he had always given Marcus. "He hasn't forgotten his training," Marcus explained to a young veteran watching Shadow comfort an anxious peer. "He's just found a new mission. Instead of detecting threats, he's detecting pain. Instead of protecting us from physical danger, he's helping us face our internal battles." The young veteran nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "He's still a service dog, just serving in a different way." "Exactly," Marcus replied, watching Shadow guide another veteran through a moment of anxiety with gentle presence. "We both are different mission, same dedication." That evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Marcus reflected on their journey. Shadow lay at his feet, relaxed but attentive, his head occasionally lifting to check their surroundings. More from habit than necessity, the bond between them had not only survived their separation, but had grown stronger through the process of finding each other again. 6 months after their reunion, Marcus and Shadow's story had spread far beyond the VA center, touching hearts and inspiring hope across the country. A local news station had picked up their story, featuring them in a segment about the Second Chance K9 program. The footage of their initial reunion, Shadow's moment of recognition, and their subsequent journey together resonated with viewers. Nationwide, particularly within the military community, one crisp morning in early spring, Marcus received a call from Lisa that would add another chapter to their story. The Second Chance K9 program had been selected for a special congressional hearing on veteran support programs, and they wanted Marcus and Shadow to testify about their experience. "Your story represents everything we're trying to achieve," Lisa explained. "The healing power of these reunions, the importance of never giving up on these connections. We need Congress to understand why this program deserves more funding, why every military working dog and handler deserves the chance you and Shadow had." The journey to Washington, D.C. proved to be a testament to how far Shadow had come in his transition. The dog handled the airport with remarkable composure, staying close to Marcus, but showing none of the hypervigilance that had characterized his earlier working dog behavior. During the flight, he remained calm and attentive, occasionally resting, his head on Marcus's leg, a gesture of comfort rather than duty. Their testimony was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. As they walked up the steps of the Capitol building, Shadow matched his pace perfectly to Marcus's slight limp, just as he had done thousands of times before. The marble halls and echoing chambers didn't faze him. His focus remained solely on supporting his handler through this new mission. The hearing room was packed with congressional staff, media representatives, and other veterans involved in service dog programs. Dr. Chen had accompanied them, along with Lisa and several members of the Second Chance K9 team. As Marcus took his seat at the testimony table, Shadow settled beside him, alert but relaxed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the committee chairwoman, began, "Please tell us about your experience with the Second Chance K9 program and your reunion with Shadow." Marcus leaned forward to the microphone, one hand resting on Shadow's head. He spoke about their years together in Afghanistan, the ambush that separated them, and the long journey that led to their reunion. As he described the moment, Shadow finally recognized him, his voice thick with emotion. The dog pressed closer, offering the same steady support he always had. Shadow and I completed over 200 missions together, Marcus explained. We saved countless lives, protected our fellow soldiers, faced danger side by side, but our most important mission turned out to be finding each other again, learning how to heal together. The questions from committee members revealed a deep interest in the broader implications of their story. How many other military working dogs might be out there, separated from their handlers? How many veterans might find healing through similar reunions? Shadow's presence in the hearing room served as powerful testimony, a living example of the program's success. During a break in the proceedings, several committee members approached to meet Shadow personally. The dog maintained his perfect manners, allowing gentle greetings while staying attentive to Marcus. One senator, a Vietnam veteran himself, knelt despite his aged knees to look Shadow in the eyes. "You're a credit to your training, soldier," the senator said softly, understanding in his voice. "Both of you are." The impact of their testimony became clear in the following weeks. Congress approved increased funding for the Second Chance K9 program, along with new initiatives to track and document the locations of retired military working dogs. Their story had helped create a pathway for other handlers searching for their former partners. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a Second Chance K9 graduation ceremony back at the VA Center. Marcus and Shadow had been asked to speak to a group of newly reunited handlers and dogs, sharing their experience and offering hope to those just beginning their journey together. As Marcus looked out at the faces before him, both human and canine, he saw their own story reflected back. Dogs learning to trust again, handlers healing through renewed connections, partnerships being rebuilt one day at a time. Shadow sat beside him, proudly wearing his new therapy dog vest, a symbol of his transition from warrior to healer. The bond between a handler and their military working dog is unique, Marcus told the group. It's forged in the most challenging conditions, tested in the face of danger, and strengthened through absolute trust. That bond doesn't disappear with separation. It just needs the chance to be remembered. After the ceremony, Marcus and Shadow took their usual evening walk around the VA Center grounds. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the grass. Shadow moved with the confidence of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged, his steps perfectly synchronized with his handlers. They paused at the training area where they had first reunited, now transformed into a dedicated space for the Second Chance K9 program. New obstacles and equipment filled the space, all designed to help other dogs and handlers find their way back to each other. Shadow surveyed the area with interest, his tail wagging gently at the familiar scents and sights. "We did good, buddy," Marcus said quietly, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "We found our way back, and now we're helping others do the same." Shadow looked up at him with those knowing eyes, the same eyes that had finally recognized him that pivotal day 6 months ago. In them, Marcus saw not just his partner from Afghanistan, but the companion who had helped him rebuild his life, find new purpose, and heal old wounds. They had both changed through their separation and reunion, growing into something stronger together. As they walked back to the car, Marcus reflected on their journey. From the battlefields of Afghanistan to the halls of Congress, from the moment of loss to the joy of reunion, their story had become more than just a personal triumph. It had become a beacon of hope for others, a testament to the enduring power of loyalty, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a handler and their dog. Shadow pressed against his leg, a gesture that now carried the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future together. They had found each other again, and in doing so, had found a new mission, helping others believe in the possibility of their own reunions, their own healing, their own second chances. 1 year after their reunion, Marcus and Shadow sat in the backyard of their new house on the outskirts of San Antonio. The property, with its sprawling acre of land, had been a deliberate choice, a space where Shadow could run freely while maintaining a safe distance from the bustle of city life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the newly installed agility course, a modified version of their old training ground that now served a different purpose. The Second Chance K9 program had grown exponentially since their congressional testimony, and Marcus had taken on a new role as a program coordinator. Their home had become a transitional training facility, helping other reunited pairs adjust to civilian life together. The agility course, gentler than its military counterparts, helped retired working dogs remember the joy of movement without the pressure of mission requirements. Today was special. They were expecting their first official training pair. James Henderson, a former Army Ranger, had just been reunited with his Belgian Malinois, Zeus, after 4 years of separation. Like Shadow, Zeus was struggling to transition from his ingrained military training to civilian companionship. "What do you think, buddy?" Marcus asked, watching Shadow survey the course with professional interest. "Ready to help another team find their way?" Shadow's response was to press against Marcus's leg before trotting to the start of the course, his posture indicating readiness but not tension. He had come so far from the rigidly professional military working dog of a year ago. While he maintained his protective instincts and training, he had learned to balance them with a newfound ability to relax and enjoy life. The sound of a car approaching drew their attention. Shadow's ears pricked forward, but his tail remained relaxed, another sign of his successful transition. Through the gate came James, walking with the characteristic determination of someone fighting through physical therapy, Zeus moving precisely at his side. Marcus recognized the look in Zeus's eyes immediately, the same hypervigilance Shadow had shown in those early days. The dog was scanning constantly, responding to every sound, maintaining absolute professional distance from his handler despite their recent reunion. "Welcome to the ranch," Marcus called out, keeping his voice calm and steady. Shadow remained by his side, offering a perfect example of balanced behavior, alert but not tense, protective but not aggressive. James nodded, his grip on Zeus's leash slightly too tight. "Thanks for having us. The Second Chance team they said you might be able to help." His voice carried the weight of hope and hesitation that Marcus remembered all too well. "Shadow and I have been where you are," Marcus replied, gesturing to the chairs he'd set up in the shade. "It takes time, but the bond is still there. Sometimes it just needs a different environment to resurface." As they sat down, Marcus noticed how Zeus positioned himself exactly as Shadow used to, maintaining tactical awareness of all approaches. The dog's muscles were tense, his training preventing him from fully connecting with the handler he had only recently remembered. "He recognized me at the facility," James explained, watching Zeus with a mixture of joy and concern. "It was amazing, emotional, everything they said it would be. But now it's like he doesn't know how to be anything but a working dog, like he's stuck in mission mode." Marcus nodded, understanding perfectly. Shadow was the same way. These dogs have spent years being reinforced for maintaining professional distance. They need to remember that it's okay to just be dogs again, to connect on a deeper level. Throughout the morning, Marcus and Shadow demonstrated various exercises they had developed. Activities that helped military working dogs transition while maintaining their dignity and training. Shadow showed Zeus how to interact with recreational agility equipment, approaching it with enjoyment rather than duty. "The key," Marcus explained as they watched the dogs navigate the course, "is not to erase their training, but to help them understand that there are times when they can relax that training. They need to learn that they're safe, that their handlers are safe, and that their mission has changed." As the day progressed, subtle changes began to appear in Zeus's behavior. Watching Shadow's relaxed but attentive demeanor seemed to awaken something in him. During a water break, Zeus briefly pressed against James's leg, a mirror of Shadow's supportive gesture to Marcus. "Did you see that?" James whispered, emotion thick in his voice. "That's the first time he's done that since we found each other." Marcus smiled, remembering his own joy at these small victories. "It's starting. He's remembering how to be your partner, not just your working dog. Shadow and I can help you build on that." The program they had developed was comprehensive, a mixture of physical activities, bonding exercises, and gradual exposure to civilian life. Each element was designed to help both dog and handler remember their connection while building a new kind of partnership. By late afternoon, the changes in both James and Zeus were noticeable. James's grip on the leash had relaxed, and Zeus's constant scanning had reduced to occasional awareness checks. They weren't fully transformed. That would take time and patience, but they had taken their first steps toward true reunion. As James and Zeus prepared to leave, Marcus shared his final thoughts for the day. "Remember, you're not trying to change who he is. Zeus will always be a highly trained military working dog. That's part of what makes him special. The goal is to help him understand that he can be both that dog and your companion." The transformation in their own lives had led Marcus and Shadow to this new purpose. Their home had become more than just a safe haven. It was a place of healing, of transition, of second chances. The agility course, the quiet acres, the peaceful environment, everything was designed to help other pairs find their way back to each other, just as they had. That evening, after James and Zeus had left, Marcus and Shadow sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. Shadow lay at Marcus's feet, relaxed but present, embodying the balance they now helped others achieve. "You're a good teacher, buddy," Marcus said softly, reaching down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. The dog looked up at him with knowing eyes, understanding in his gaze. They had found their new mission, helping other handlers and dogs remember that their bonds could survive anything, even years of separation and change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pairs needing guidance, new opportunities to share the lessons they had learned. But for now, they sat together in the growing darkness, two warriors who had found their way home to each other, now lighting the path for others to follow. If you enjoyed Marcus and Shadow's journey of rediscovery and reunion, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you powerful stories of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that define our lives. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to ensure you never miss our latest inspiring tales. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are possible and that some bonds truly stand the test of time. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with service animals or reunions that changed your life. Thank you for being part of our community where every story matters and hope never fades. We'll see you in our next video with another remarkable journey that will touch your heart.